Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure and real honor to introduce to you the herbalist that I want to interview and speak with today. I don't know whether these are interviews or discussions, but we'll see what this one turns out to be. It's Dr. William Morris. He's a doctor of traditional Oriental medicine since 1987 and has an OMD and studied with Mikishima, who was also one of my teachers as well. I got a lot from him. And pulse diagnosis with Dr. Leon Hammer. And then he went on to develop doctoral programs for SAMRA and AOMA. He served as consultant Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. He was president of the American, what's AOMA stand for?
Oh yeah, the American Association of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, or American Association of Oriental Medicine. They had different changes of title over the years. Yeah.
In a word, William Morris is a very accomplished herbalist, very accomplished teacher. He's got a PhD and he's a professional member of the AHG. He's got a PhD, and we're going, without any further ado, we're going to begin. And I thought, William, you might show your books and just say a little bit about them, just to start off with.
Very good. Thanks for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I have these aren't all my books. This is a book I did through People's Medical Publishing House, TCM Case Studies.
A little closer.
Dermatology. And there it is.
Yeah, that's good.
So I had spent 5 years studying with a man named Gu Neiqiang, and so when I finished doing this book on pulse diagnosis with People's Medical Publishing House,
yeah, that's practically classic at this point.
Yeah, it is actually. It has become really required material for many schools now. But I mean, I see no financial returns on this because they paid me a one-off fee to do this, and I was happy to do it.
Oh, and,
good. So that was a great experience doing that, and then following that, I set up my own publishing house and did this one, which is Neoclassical Pulse Diagnosis, and this book deals primarily with the meridian systems. It's very acupuncturistic, whereas the other two are herbal.
Yeah, I don't know that book.
Yeah.
But I do know the other two, and we had you as a guest speaker at one of our on-site seminars at the East-West School, and you were very popularly received and blew everybody away with your knowledge of pulse diagnosis and acumen with all that, and some of the findings that you've come up with that I've never seen anywhere else. So.
Yeah, it was a privilege. That was a great class. I really enjoyed those people. I still have connections with some of the folks who have showed up there.
Yeah, people still.
And I had connections before they showed up there. It was great.
People still remember you and your teachings. Okay, so we have an agenda of topics to talk about here that Will would be expert at responding to, and one of them is about what constitutes good evidence in herbal healing. And so, Will, what does constitute good evidence in herbal healing? I have my ideas, but I want to hear yours.
Right. Well, there's this big cultural move towards evidence-based practice, right? And that's going on in conventional medicine. Pardon me?
Could you define evidence-based practice for?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of literature out there that goes into a process of describing what it is and what constitutes good evidence. And so in conventional medicine, the very top of the pyramid of what constitutes good evidence is the gold standard, which is a randomized controlled trial. But that's actually a colonizing concept, because the purpose of the randomized controlled trial is to bring a pharmaceutical agent to market and demonstrate safety and efficacy of that material. When you're dealing with more complex agents, such as even a single plant medicinal or a formula, all of a sudden the criteria for evidence has to become something that's different. So I was presenting on strategies for globalizing Chinese medical research at a scientific forum in Guangzhou, I think maybe about 15 years ago. And I saw some informatics specialists presenting on the notion that China felt that a more balanced equation for developing evidence would be inclusive of the entire history of case studies. So this business of case vignettes and a historical literate tradition of case vignettes for some 2,000 years becomes, in a way, a very compelling database of evidence, which is of a qualitative nature. So where the U.S. government's going in terms of funding research is they're looking for a balance between qualitative research, which is describing an experience of an individual, versus quantitative, which is using large data pools in order to attempt to prove something. And
let me see if I can put that in other words.
Yeah.
In other words, TCM has a history of going back arguably 5,000 years of use with formulas that have been carried through that whole period of time in one way or another, and changed also. But that has to be one factor of evidence, and pitting that against the pharmaceutical approach, which is what is it in the herbs and or the formulas that are actually bringing results. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Well, no, but I think that's an important question. So what I'm talking about is, how do we as human beings know what we know? And in qualitative data, the validity is gained by, in a sense of truthiness or a sense of coherence of the data as it pulls up. So part of that evidence-based practice is, I want to see that the outcomes are present. If I give it a herb formula, I want to see that the purpose that I gave it for, that the results are there. Right. And so that outcomes-based measure is not always quantitative, but it could be qualitative. I feel better. Really, how do you feel better? I just don't know, Doc. I feel better. I feel like getting up in the morning. I feel like going out and going to work, and none of that's in the zone of quantitative. Although there's ways to render this into quantitative, but that bias towards the objective is a failing of contemporary society based on a limited scope of view.
Huh. Right? What do you mean by that?
Well, what has happened to us? What has happened to us that the objective has gained primacy over the subjective? That our personal experience isn't just as valid.
Oh, yes.
As some larger numerical status.
Right.
You know,
I recently had an experience with that because, as you know from our communication, I've been sick with a horrible cough for a couple months, which was reconciled, interestingly enough, but and very quickly. But I took a Chinese longevity formula. I can't quite say everything that was in it right now offhand.
Oh yeah, they're big.
And I immediately have more energy than I've ever had before. I feel so darn good. And I know that taking that, like a teaspoon in the morning of that longevity formula, which has like things like tortoise shell and stuff like that in it, as well as the ginsengs and astragalus and rhamnosus. But anyway, just taking a teaspoon of that every morning made me I had a direct experience of how these things really work for longevity. Longevity means not just that you live longer, but you live better longer.
Right. Well, you know, and then returning to the notion of objective versus subjective, what we don't recognize is that oftentimes in scientific journals, the information is reported as if in a third person, which gives an appearance of some form of objectiveness. But the fact is that every bit of that process, the question, the way the data gets collected, the way it gets processed, and the way it gets presented is subjectively ensconced. In other words, the worldview and the beliefs of the researcher, who funds that researcher, and all those factors should be brought forward if there's to be a resolute authenticity of presentation.
Exactly.
And that is not what happens.
Yeah, I've and maybe a little bit along the lines of how I kind of put that into a smaller soundbite, which is that basically we want to know not how a formula works, but why it works, and
Right.
it all depends on the question. Science without the initial question, the hypotheses of the question, means nothing. So the questions you ask are the answers that you're going to get. And by and large, people are asking the wrong questions when it comes to evaluating herbal medicine. That's my opinion, anyway.
Absolutely true. And we've seen some research on like St. John's wort coming out of Bastyr that was where it showed that it didn't work, and that was actually because the study wasn't designed so well. And then we discovered that, well, it was actually funded from a conventional medical system in Massachusetts. And then we see, oh, okay, well, we understand that it is a socially complex matter, the process of inquiry and its use as evidence for policymaking in particular.
Right. Great.
Yeah, we could go for a long time on this.
I'm afraid of launching off on something that could go for a long time, but I'm gonna leave it at that for you to just kind of cap off. If there's anything else you want to say about evidence-based medicine, can people trust what they read in herbals in terms of what the herb is supposed to be doing? That gets into the difference between TCM, Ayurvedic ideas, and Western herbs, and the books that people go to and the references that they use.
Yeah. So Madame Greaves, one of my favorite Western herbals is.
Me too.
Yeah, I love her. Anyway, it's a historic document, and it's worth exploring. But the thing is, I don't think we can use a herb for every problem for which it's listed there. The real question is it the correct herb for this person?
Exactly.
And then if there's a symptom there that they're experiencing that's in that list, the odds are going to be far better. And so then the question is going to be, well, how do we discern for whom a particular agent might be useful? And so can we trust the herbals? Well, can we trust manufactured research data? We have to trust ourselves, and that's what it's got to come back to, and we have to be able to trust those people that we ask to assist us in our processes of growth and healing. So,
right, I can't mention an example offhand, but I can't tell you how many times me, quote unquote, the highly experienced herbalist, am informed by somebody who's essentially a beginner, telling me that they had a terribly chronic problem, and they took poke root, and it cured everything they had. And I said,
cure everything quick.
well, I mean, I guess they took the right dosage, but I believe it. She did recover from everything she had, and I've had so many things like that where I learned from students, because each person may pick up one little factoid that is not in any book, and of course, when I look at it, well, who's the person that took that poke root, and how appropriate was it? It might have been very, very appropriate for that person and not for another, but still, herbal medicine was discovered by people just accidentally hitting on things and passing it along. And we can't stop that transference of knowledge, because that's just basically what it comes from.
Right. Yeah, that's like Shen Nun. He was the grand patriarch of herbal medicine in China, and he looks all bent over and gnarly and
Yeah,
twisted, and that's because he's eaten so many toxic herbs in service to humanity.
right.
Uh, yeah, and recording the results, and he came up with the concept of like the three qualities of medicinals. Right. You have the lowest quality, which are toxic, and the middle quality, which are directional, like you take some bitter herb to clear some inflammation or heat and swelling and so forth. But then, and then the superior grade medicinals, which got co-opted by the Russians for the concept of adaptogens, which are those agents which are non-directional and nutritional and can be used for long periods of time. And those were what Shen Nun classified as the superior class of herbs. And it was from that class of herbs that the Russians did that research that developed the term adaptogen.
Yeah, I've really questioned that term a lot, and I know David Winston wrote a book on it.
Yeah,
The question I have is what is an adaptogen?
right.
And
Well,
so
I mean,
many definitions that are out there, and people are calling almost anything that helps them an adaptogen.
yeah, that. Well, you know what's interesting is that, of course, when they pulled herbs from the Chinese Materia Medica to develop this, of course, the one that rose to the top was Eleutherococcus, what they called Siberian ginseng.
Right,
Uh, but so Eleuthero is in the class of agents which are chi supplementing, but also resolves musculoskeletal problems. It was
right,
kind of fascinating. So, but it could be used for a long period of time. It was non-directional. The thing is, I think the superior class of agents were really the original adaptogens, and they are inclusive of those materials that nourish blood and vitality and the warming metabolic capacity or the cooling and moistening capacity, or what we call qi, blood, yin and yang tonics in Chinese medicine.
right.
But uh, that the nourishing, supplementing class of agents within Chinese medicine were uh, what the Russians co-opted into an identifier of adaptogen.
Right. The rhodiola is also known in Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
Eleutherococcus, or quote unquote, I can't, dare I say it, Siberian, not ginseng.
You can say that if that's what they call it, right? That they called it.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that herb particularly was fascinated me, because as I think geography might show us, China and Russia is separated by a mountain range, and one side of that mountain range is Russia, the other side is China, and China has an herb which is very closely related to Eleuthero. I forget the name of it, but it's used for arthritic problems. You might recall the name of that herb, but it's commonly used in Chinese medicine. And of course, Eleuthero is adaptogen, so it means it's supposed to be helpful to adapt to everything, including problems that people might have with arthritic conditions and climate. Well, I was once in an airport, or somewhere in China, or somewhere in travel, and there was a conference going on between a bunch of people, Chinese people also, sitting around a table talking about using these herbs interchangeably, the Chinese and the other one, and selling them with just some names. It's basically a different species of the same name. And
Very common. That's a common practice. Yeah.
when I broached this topic with David Winston, who's a stickler for things like that, he absolutely made a distinction between those two herbs. But I remember sitting there and hearing them marketing these things interchangeably, and I was really amazed by that. So I don't know what to make out of that, but nevertheless, I think of Eleuthero as arthritis ginseng.
Right. There you go. There you, right. Okay. But let's go back to rhodiola because I can't put rhodiola into a class of an adaptogen. I mean, yeah, it increases oxygen load in the blood and can increase mental in particular adaptations, but it is extremely drying and is a specific pulmonary agent for altitude sickness, right? Uh, but if a person uses too much rhodiola at altitude, they start suffering pretty severe dry mouth, dry mucous membranes, and so forth. It has to be complemented with some kind of a demulcent
Huh,
in order to be usable for any long period of time. So therefore, it fails the long-term use nutritive component rule in my book.
right. Then there's a seldom used or mentioned adaptogen called Maral, which is supposedly one that's sort of for bodybuilders, but I won't get into that subject at all. But okay, so getting on to formulas for quantifying TCM, or formula for quantifying I think we covered that.
Quantify, yeah. Oh, we're talking about diagnosis.
Diagnosis, that was
Yeah,
that was what we wanted to get into. That's a
yeah,
big subject because Western diagnosis is based on named diseases, and Chinese diagnosis only recently, and you might say this is a deficiency in my studies of Chinese medicine, but only recently have I come across any big issue that Chinese medicine also have named diseases, which are very much like the same diseases we have today. So the notion that we treat the person and not the disease is true up to a point.
only to a point.
Okay, good.
So it's called
we agree. Go ahead.
it's called Bing Zheng. The Bing is the disease and the Zheng is the pattern.
Yep.
So the cause of disease and the patterns of disease. So we can find in the Golden Cabinet, which is circa 200 A.D., Han Dynasty. There's discussion of dermatological complaints, and there's single terms that describe only the disease, such as erysipelas or something like this. And so, what has progressed in the Chinese dermatological discipline is that single diagnostic terms that are Western in nature are often used, and then a pattern is also applied. A pattern discrimination is used. One of my first teachers was a guy named Jinling Wang. Dr. Wang survived the Cultural Revolution in prison by laughing. And so when we were in clinic together, people would come with very serious conditions, and he would have this infectious laughter. The patient, everyone in the whole room's laughing, and I really appreciated that. But
I like it.
He was converted from conventional medicine to herbal medicine, and was a huge fan of using a formula based on the pattern, but then also using an evidence-based approach to selecting a single agent that treated the condition, the disease condition.
Right.
And so that was my practice habit for most of my career. It's been a significant keystone to the whole process for me.
Would you go over that again? I think I missed that.
Yeah. The idea of a pattern, and we have to be able to
a single
this is the gap. This is the gap in conventional Western thought, right? That you can identify a cause of the disease and have some agent, whether it's a drug or a herb, doesn't make any difference. Some agent which will treat that cause, right?
Yay! Thank you. Now let me go ahead. Yay! Because let me just give you a little bit of background on how I understand how I came into this fallacy of treating the patient, not the disease. Which
fallacy. I think. Let me get to you.
Partial fallacy, because people go crazy trying to find the patterns and ignore the disease, and that doesn't work either.
Right, that's absolutely true.
So what happened is that the first introduction of Chinese medicine in North America was acupuncture. And for the longest time, Ephraim Korngold, who actually taught me acupuncture in a commune in Northern California,
I know, I've been to that facility.
he and I decided, well, the acupuncture is really great. Let's go and figure out what we can learn about herbs. We've already seen Norma Myers and Dr. Christopher and so forth, but there was nothing about Chinese herbs at all at that time. It was basically Worsley 5-element acupuncture.
Yeah.
And so we went and found this Taoist guy off of Golden Gate Park named Foon Li Wong, and he began to teach us about Chinese herbs, but it was kind of a, the Taoists are kind of pranksters or coyote characters a lot of times. He said $10, $1 an herb, $10 a session. So each one of us dutifully gave him our $10, and he'd read from a book and translate from Chinese what the book said. When he got to about 100 herbs, I said, well, how do I use these things? He said, when we get to 300, I'll tell you how to use it. And that's when I signed off. But there was, at that point, acupuncture schools and my own learning from other sources was all about patterns and all about treating the person, not the disease. And herbal medicine is about treating the disease and the pattern. And acupuncture is very much treating the pattern, and that especially in Worsley acupuncture, 5-element acupuncture.
Yeah, of course, I studied a lot with who we talked about Jung Wei Jie. Dr. Jung treated the disease. We would and those people who came out of Master Dong's school of thought, there was no diagnosis. Oh, there's the problem. Here's the network of how you relate to it, and there's where the needle goes, and that's what you treat. And there's no
all of a sudden
philosophical order that's going on about some constitution and so forth. Although constitution's vital when we get around to root and branch, it becomes vital. Yeah,
nothing is lost in the learning, but as traditional Chinese medicine was exported to the West, bits and pieces came in, and pieces were left out, and so yes. I was left with this problem of okay, I know about the patterns, I know this, I know that, but how do I actually treat people with their diseases when they come to me in a clinic?
Exactly.
And I have to tell you how I cheated and got away with it and thought I was committing a crime in TCM land. I have Him Chi Young's book on treating formulas, and I noticed how under any disease she had a limited number of 4 or 5 formulas, and I would literally look at each one of those formulas when somebody came to me with a disease, and I'd find out and I'd decide which one was corresponded the most to that patient. I couldn't use patterns because it was just not working too well. And that's how I started actually treating successfully with traditional Chinese medicine. And what I got from that is that every one of these books that are written on herbal medicine presents a disease with a limited number of formulas. And when we teach pulse and tongue diagnosis, we got unlimited pulses and tongues. But for a disease, there may be a limited number of pulses and tongues to discriminate from. And that helps a lot in determining which might be the most likely. So you don't have to go through 29 or however number of pulses that there are to figure out how to treat somebody. Now, of course, all of this is not perfect, but nevertheless, that was what I came onto, and I thought I was doing sacrilege in TCM land.
Heretic, you were a heretic. But I think that's a legitimate way of knowing. Backing your way into a health condition based on this evaluation of single medicinals within a formula,
right,
is I think an essential exercise to arrive at formulas that are actually going to work.
Right.
Yeah.
So now diagnosis, has been a really big issue, and because when I was on the admissions board, we had a lot of people who just came in and they would they wouldn't go through the steps of diagnosing somebody. They would just say, take this herb. This herb is for that. This herb is for that, and this herb is for that. And generally, they all failed to pass the admissions when they did that. And every once in a while, and what I'm finding is a lot of Western herbalists are getting a lot more sophisticated now. Some of them are really, really good, and I really respect them. They're using Western medicine basically in a very sound Chinese way. And when I see that happening, where they're actually discriminating different signs and symptoms, I have nothing but utmost respect, because they're basically using Chinese medicine, but using it in Western terms a lot of the times, in terms of finding the most appropriate treatment. I recommend you sometimes join the admissions board of the HG. It's a really kind of an interesting exercise for a while.
Yeah, I would actually consider that. That's an area of interest in me for me.
It's needed.
Yeah. As you're talking about that concept, I see this like in a lot of internet or online inquiries about treating various conditions, is that okay, there's this body of research for a medicinal, but I rarely see that people have gone in and taken the history and physical signs and symptoms to come up with some kind of a judgment which relates to the recommendation, beyond that of a labeled disease and maybe some body of research that shows a medicinal may have an effect on that disease.
Right. I'm gonna turn you loose on TCM diagnosis here a little bit, explaining the importance of the 4 different diagnostic methods. But before that, I wanted to know if you come across Bob Flaw's seminar, I guess, called the 4 Firsts. The 4 Firsts, basically just determining constitution and age. And when they're children, basically you look to kidney problems, and when they're middle age, and middle age could be all the way up to 50s and 60s and 70 years old even. It's the time of strife where you're trying to make your mark in the world. That's the liver chi stagnation phase. And then there's the old age phase where basically there's going to be blood stagnation and phlegm as an issue. I found that to be remarkably hold out, so that I go to those things when I see people at these different ages, and most of the time I'll find that a formula that corresponds to those kinds of imbalances that happen at those stages of life can be more effectively treated when you take into account of treating those conditions. So I don't know, did that make any sense to you, what I just said?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, stages of life are a critical feature of medical care, and our ability to make prognostication or diagnosis is partly filtered by the disease conditions that go with particular age groups. Right. And of course, there's always outliers, but there's some general principles to this concept. But you're reminding me of my experience with John H.F. Shen, and also my work combining herbal medicine with the concepts that I got from Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas, who did research on birth trauma there in Esalen in California.
Yeah, John Shen, for everybody's information, is probably one of the most respected TCM practitioner that has arrived in America. I don't know what you think about that, but
well, I actually happen to agree. I've been in the fortunate position of running clinics with 500 patients a week in them, and other clinics with 300 patients a week, and in the LA basin, having senior practitioners and the best of the best. One man whose family was part of the Beijing TCM University build out. And anyway, I could say this unequivocally, that in all these places of 18 years of academic medicine, running these clinics and so forth, that Dr. Shen got results far and away beyond that of anything that I saw in any of those scenarios. it was he was a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I only encountered him once when he was very old in a very brief seminar, and I remember he was kind of a stand-up comedian.
He's a character. Well,
And
I
I
know him.
appreciated that.
I met him in his office in New York, and then I went to his home in Connecticut, and then I had him out to teach in California when I was serving as dean at Emperor's College, and so I had also actually had an ongoing relationship with him through my patients, because the moment I got out of acupuncture school, I had patients coming to me who were also seeing Dr. Shen in New York, and I was in Los Angeles, and they would come to me in LA. So they were always showing me the formulas that he gave them. And so I actually tracked his work personally through my patient body throughout my career, all the way up until 2000, when I started getting involved more in academics.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was a tremendous privilege. Anyway,
Yeah,
and then also
your background is so valuable. It's one of the reasons why I have you on this on my radar for doing an interview, because you're a wealth of experience and working with at the very top level with TCM, and so yeah. Okay, thank you.
So yeah. Anyway, that was great. Okay, so the idea of diagnosis, that part of what made Dr. Shen so remarkable was his ability to diagnose, and he was not limited to palpatory, olfactory, listening, and seeing. He was very good at diagnosing from the ears and from facial markings, and so, but which is of course in the visual zone. But I had this great experience when I was in Guangzhou teaching on strategies for globalizing Chinese medical research. My translator took me out to study with her master, and they did this thing where they orthopedics, and they're gazing from behind, and they're looking at the lineup between the shoulders and between the hips. It was like a traditional osteopathic type of workout. Anyway, and so the acupuncture was all done based on getting all those uneven lines to come back into alignment. It was very cool, and that affected me and my practice. But so there's different ways that we have to be able to see and know what's going on with a person. And if we don't know what's going on, if all we have is that they're telling us that they have some diagnosis, which someone else told them, that's so abstract in my book. I can't make sense of that. I said, tell me what you're experiencing.
Right.
And, right.
Yeah. It's like Dragnet. Tell me only the facts, ma'am.
Right.
All the things you took.
So this is called phenomenology. It's a philosophical discipline, but it is the ability to speak the actual experience. Right. And so some people have a very difficult time speaking to their actual experience. They'll just start talking about, oh no, so and so told me I've got dysbiosis or but they're not able to ground what their experience is. We have to know that Dr. Shen spent a lot of time on getting a good history.
The point you're making here is so important, and I think it's worth your saying it again.
Oh yeah, I feel strongly about it.
It's so important.
Yeah, how do we get? For me, it's about getting in contact with the real.
Right.
Not some idea. No, I'm not interested in any idea I have that I'm going to lay over this thing, or some idea that patient has that they're bringing to the table. But in that moment, if we can get down to a real experience, and then if I can be holding the pulse while they get engaged with that real experience, now all of a sudden I have this depth of knowledge taking place, which is very rewarding for everyone.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I really stress with my advanced students, is to be sure to control the session. Don't let people just wander all over the place. It'll confuse the hell out of you if you do.
Right. the what is it? Yeah, so yeah, some patients can just go from one associative thought to the next, and you
Exactly.
don't get anywhere. And so that's a good moment to look at the tongue.
So now, speaking about the role of the tongue and the pulse, first of all, I want to just precede this by saying that somehow or another, these things have become very much associated with traditional Chinese medicine. But it wasn't that long ago when pulse and tongue diagnosis was part of Western medical practice.
Right.
And I recently spoke to a woman who was a nurse who works with me in the free clinic, and she knew most of the pulses that are in TCM as part of her training of what to recognize. And so pulse diagnosis is not limited, is not necessarily this big mysterious thing. And you and I may lock horns over this a little bit, but that's okay. I think people should appreciate when herbalists either disagree or have issues and argue about stuff. I think it's a useful thing for people to observe.
Well, it gives a window into critical thought because you have different arguments from different perspectives, and that perspectivism is a feature of the willingness to entertain different perspectives is essential.
Right. And it's important for people to validate their own truth in that process, to realize that two people who are esteemed have their own truths that they arrived at, and doesn't mean it means that there's room for you to have yours. And I think that's how the whole thing kind of.
But you're reminding me of the story of Galen, who
Yeah.
Floyer, who wrote the Physician's Pulse Watch about 1700, right, which was a large part an expose attacking Galen's work. But Galen successfully stated that this one actor was having an affair with someone because of the way the pulse changed when he started talking about that person.
Huh.
And so, but so the pulse diagnosis has been intrinsic to the Western tradition, and we saw it a lot with the eclectic physicians, right? They published books on pulse diagnosis for these these medicinals that work in the middle range, not homeopathic, not herbal, but these
Right.
low potency drop dose concepts with
Right.
oftentimes more toxic agents. It was a fascinating area to study. But in any regard, they were prescribing on the basis of pulse presentations in a very large way. But not just that, they had sophisticated clinical skills. And what's happened in a technocratic medical society is that the development of technicians who can only make diagnostic conclusions on the basis of imaging, lab work. They've lost contact with reality. They're in an abstract world
Right.
That is out of touch, in fact.
Right. And I think, and I might add to that, I think the days of our pitting which medicine is better and which medicine is worse, Western or traditional, those are gone. Really, there are really very, very good Western medical doctors, and there are really some lousy traditional doctors and alternative practitioners as well.
Every discipline's got both folks.
So
for sure. I had the privilege because I found out I was pre-diabetic, so I went into a program up here with some docs that specialized in lifestyle medicine, and they were the smartest docs, and they were up on all the research relative to lifestyle factors that you can use in dietary stuff, and I was mind blown by and that's all in conventional side and state approved and insurance covered.
Yeah, I started this whole discussion on an herbal list that you were part of about the cough that I had being caused by reflux. And I tried every possible remedy for coughs that I could think of over the process of 2 months. These coughs, by the way, were incapacitated.
Like your cherry bark formula? I love your cherry bark formula.
Yeah, well, it works really great for normal cough.
For a real cough. I mean, or a cough,
when it's caused by
centric cough, right?
When it's caused by the stomach and reflux,
Yeah.
I had no concept of that. Somehow or other, that was never introduced to me. Maybe you in your wisdom know about all that, but I didn't. And I visited my medical doctor the second time, and this time he listened to me talk more, and he heard that I didn't cough until I started eating in the morning. And that triggered saying that, oh yeah, it's reflux. And he gave me a acid blocker. I forget, omeprazole or something like that. But anyways, it was Gaviscon. And a cough that was like incapacitating. I could not talk. As soon as I took 2 tablets of that Gaviscon, it's over the counter, my cough stopped absolutely immediately.
There you go. Case taking, the history, seeing the connection between the reality. Oh, you eat food and you get a cough.
Now,
yeah, good.
Now, that particular type has alginate in it, so that it actually heals the leak.
Oh, fantastic.
So like 4 or 5 days of taking it, I no longer take it, and the cough is still gone. Because I don't think it's a good thing for people to take acid blockers. Most hyperacidity is caused by hypoacidity, as we both know. And so trying to control stomach acid is a formula for really wrecking your digestion seriously.
Well, there's also long-term harm that can be caused by proton pump inhibitors.
Right.
And so
yeah. I wanted to talk about in more detail your pulse diagnosis. You want to show your book again?
Sure. Well, it's 2 of them. This is neoclassical pulse diagnosis.
Yeah,
this deals with pulse diagnostic techniques for meridian system, like the 8 extraordinary vessels and that kind of stuff. There's pulses for each of those. Then the Lineage is essentially a construction or a reconstruction of Lineage, who wrote the Chinese, the most substantial materia medica in Chinese medicine. And but anyway, so this one deals with his pulse diagnostic methods, which is the basis for all TCM schools of, where you have the 27 qualities, which there's no basis in reality about 27 qualities being the number of qualities that there are. That was a mnemonic device based on constellations.
Uh-huh.
And the mansions of the moon were actually what informed that kind of a structure. And it's actually a terrible structure, because what happens is then you don't get a good workup on things like rhythm and rate. You'll have a description of a pulse which is hurried, which is rapid, but or pulses which are interrupted. So what is that? So that's irregular. Well, Leon Hammer gave us a taxonomy for these pulses, which is great. You can have them be regularly irregular, or they can be irregularly irregular. So it goes boom, 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 as opposed to boom, boom. Right? The regularly irregular and the irregularly irregular, and the constant versus the occasional. So your severity is determined by constancy. And the nature of the pathology has to do with the rate, and he just takes rate and does it as a separate thing. Anyway, really a genius workup on it. Lineage's workup on it, because it's trying to comply with the structure of constellations, was kind of trying to take a square peg and put it in a round hole, kind of a thing. But
forgive me if I say that I only barely understand what you're talking about. So maybe
yeah. So you can have pulses can be regular,
yeah,
right, and they can be regular misbeat,
right.
if I regularly miss a beat,
If it's regular,
so here's regular miss beat. One, two, three,
1, 2, 3.
one. Okay, let's go. So if I'm getting the person better, it's going to maybe go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. It's less often.
Uh-huh.
Less often, the better it is.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yeah. So we get that from Hammer, actually. So,
Okay.
but
As you know, I have issues with Leon Hammer.
I know. So I mean, so do I. I mean, I love it. But he's still with us. He's in his 90s, so 94. Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say anything bad about him then.
Well,
I don't have anything bad to say about anybody.
yeah.
But
But in any regard, yeah, I think it's important to take the pulse. You get a visceral sense of what's going on, and it establishes a physical connection, which is a safe physical connection with the client. And if you're able to just take the pulse quickly while they're unwinding something very important in their life, you get a connection into that bloodstream. That bloodstream is with us as human beings since our origins on this planet. There's a deep connection that takes place there, and it can't always be articulated, but the sensibility one can drop down into allows for a level of clinical judgment that's not tied into anxious processing of data in order to arrive at a conclusion that one hopes will make a difference.
right. I guess the problem I've had with pulse diagnosis, and I know when you were here, you actually made great strides in trying to make distinction, was like, how do you discriminate, and how important is it to discriminate between a tight pulse and a wire pulse? Because they're both of them exhibit qualities of tightness, and both may experience qualities of being wiry. So you made an interesting comparison when you said the tight pulse, which signifies internal coldness, actually changes position on the wrist, which everybody was flabbergasted when you showed that, where it actually rotates horizontally slightly on the radial artery of the wrist.
Yeah, that's a real tight pulse. They don't all do that, but
the question seems to be quite simply answered when you just ask somebody, do you tend to be cold or not? And inquiries about coldness and food preferences, drinks, and how they react in cold weather and things like that. And so the pulse becomes like an exercise that's almost unnecessary in terms of that kind of.
Yeah, one way that happens is that if one palpates a tight pulse, like for instance, few instances where I go in and that's the first pulse I'm going to look for. A person complains of allergies, they've got a cold or a flu, and or menstrual pain,
right,
or stomach pain. I want to rule that out right away. So if I feel it, I'll ask. So is the period cramping better if you have a hot pad on? And then so it's kind of a triangulation of qualitative data. I'm better with heat. And your pulse moves side to side. I feel very confident with data triangulation such as that to prescribe an interior warming formula.
Right. The other thing about pulse is that when I took a group of people to Shanghai and to China to actually study Chinese medicine there for, I think it was a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and we were at the Shanghai hospital visiting different departments. The doctors there paid very cursory note of patients' pulses, and interestingly enough, I kept thinking, well, they're going to be really refined and they're going to know a hell of a lot more than me. but I would stick my hand out and say, "Oh, I want to feel the patient's pulse," and I'd feel the pulse, and I'd tell them, "Well, this is a full pulse, this is a hot pulse, this is fast pulse, or whatever." And every time, no matter what I said, they said it was right.
Yeah, yeah.
I
There,
know I'm not right all the time, so go ahead.
kind of a famous story, Ted Kapchuk, where they saw a patient and they and and the physician said the pulse is wiry, and they all go okay, and then the patient goes away but didn't take the herb, so the patient has to come back and get reprocessed. They come back in the afternoon. There's a different supervisor. That supervisor goes, no, this pulse is slippery, and
Right,
and
exactly.
so right, and that's one of the problems. What happened is that in the 50s, the Chinese government brought all these pulse diagnostic experts together from all over the country. Well, every one of them is using different techniques. Some are up here, some are down here, some are in here. I mean, you can take pictures. I have pictures that I did a survey out there on the web of what the problem is with pulse reliability, inter-rater reliability with respect to pulse diagnosis, and it starts with technique. And in any regard, they weren't able to establish validity, and so it got demoted in the university system. So if you're in a university kind of a context, it would be very low on the totem pole. Now, if, however, they were Han Dynasty privileged docs, like around Chengdu, and where there's these ferment of infectious disease specialists, the Shanghanlun, uh, those people were all very good in pulse. So you have this family lineage. So what Dr. Shen was part of what was called the Ding family lineage, a very famous lineage. And he escaped before the Cultural Revolution, which is when that research and when those decisions were made that affected the schools. So he came of age as a practitioner under the guidance of very senior practitioners who knew pulse diagnosis very well. So it's not a homogenous thing. And the fact is that those schools were subject to Western scientific paradigmatic thinking in a way that caused them to lose the ability to capture the kind of nuances we're talking about here.
Right. And I think it's appropriate at this time to mention, which is something I drill into my students all the time. We're talking about differential diagnosis. And the pulse is only one parameter of diagnosis. The tongue is another. And
yes,
there's so many more. Personally, my brief experience with Dr. Shen was that he was a master not of just pulse diagnosis, but of just looking at people and being able to say, this person looks and acts this way, and so forth. And now let's feel the pulse and see how much it corresponds. I don't know. I think that it's really important to realize that differential diagnosis means that you take a number of parameters and then hope that you got the winner by what.
Yeah, I mean,
comes up.
I studied my study with Jinling Wang. We would take all the data, the tongue, the pulse, the history, all this, and we'd put it into a basket. And whatever in diagnosis, you have three primary factors. You have a location, a process, and severity. This is going to be true for any form of medicine. Doesn't make any difference. They all do this. But in any regard, what we would do, or what we encouraged to do, was throw out the stuff that didn't fit. And what I gained from Shannon Hammer was that you actually include everything. It's kind of like the the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings in China can cause a tornado in Connecticut. It comes from complex physics and weather theory, right? But so it's the same thing. These very small beginnings can then become much more serious conditions further down the line. And but in any regard, I was taught to include everything. All the data was going to be captured within the context of my formula. So when I look at a formula, I'm sitting there thinking, well, okay, this agent's covering that, and that. This agent's covering that, and that. Oh, I don't have anything in this formula that's covering that. And I'm not just going to throw it out because it doesn't fit with my attempt to get a homogeneous diagnosis.
Right.
The complexity is something we have to be, as practitioners, have a high tolerance for ambiguity and complexity, and so that becomes the basis of good sound formula construction, is that particular tolerance.
And a consummate understanding of the materia medica.
Yeah.
I mean, the first group of people that I went to China, specifically, we were the first to go there to actually learn Chinese herbal medicine. And there was a doctor there in Kunming named Zhenwen Tao, and he specialized in cardiovascular problems. And he was evidently very, very good, wonderful teacher. And he exhibited patients to us that he was treating. And one patient showed up and he said, oh, all these symptoms that they had when they came were all gone except this one. One symptom wasn't gone. So then he adds one herb to the formula, and the next week that symptom was gone.
That's it.
And that kind of precision just blew my mind. I'll never forget it, because you can only do that with Chinese medicine.
Well, you're reminding me of my experience with a man in Los Angeles named Yang Chenda. His family was the Beijing TCM University family, and he really, after Dr. Shen, got the best results of anyone I ever saw. Anyway, he would adjust a formula by like a half a gram or even less.
Oh my God.
And I said, Dr. Yang, what are you thinking of when you do that? He goes, oh, it's easy. I just think about what it tastes like. So back to your cooking metaphor, but he was very, very good at small dose.
Right.
Yeah, and the grandfather of the infectious disease school, what they call the warm heat disease school, was expert also. His name was Ye Tianshi. He was expert in very small dosing, and so I would ask Dr. Yang, "What are you reading?" He had a little book there. He goes, "Oh, these are case studies of Ye Tianshi."
Yeah, we don't have enough case studies coming out in the West. People write books on the theory, but I want to hear, okay, after you've done this theory, let me hear how it's exhibited in the cases. We don't have nearly enough of that.
We have to have so many experiences. There's no such thing as intuition in a sense, because once you've got an experiential basis, you can activate intuition. Otherwise, you like, for instance, you can't ride a bike intuitively unless you've learned how to ride a bike, right? Exactly. So reading cases is a way to quicken the process of gaining clinical experience, and it's the basis of transmission of wisdom and knowledge.
So we have many books with cases in Chinese. Actually, not enough, but we have some. But we don't have anything that's showing that is with Western medicine that I know of.
Yeah, we have Materia Medica, theoretical manuals, diagnostic. We have all those things, but not much on the case front.
Ayurveda is a system of medicine which I greatly respect. I think it's maybe equal to Chinese medicine, but I favor Chinese medicine because that's what I came into first. But increasingly, my respect for Ayurveda continues to grow, and I did study it a bit. But I don't see any cases with Ayurveda. Everybody talks about lifestyle and diet and so forth, and one of the biggest errors that Ayurveda made was to come to the West and link itself up with yoga. Because,
right.
And I said this once at an Ayurvedic conference where I was the keynote speaker, and man, I heard the boos and the yellings from people against me. It was hilarious. And even my teacher, Baba Haridas, said, Ayurveda is a part of yoga. Ayurveda are part of the Vedas. Period. They are connected. I said, yeah, they are connected, but in the West, that connection is kind of different from the way you took it when you were in India, and the idea that it supported, that Ayurveda supported people's vegetarianism and even veganism, in this obsession with purity, which I think can go too far.
Right. Right.
and Ayurveda got locked into that, and there wasn't, and then they were underdosing a lot, even by Ayurvedic standards in India. They were underdosing because they were practicing SYU medicine, called save your ass medicine.
Yeah, that's a unfortunate turn of events right there, which is too common everywhere now.
Now, what I learned and what I see in Ayurveda is it's an incredibly earthy system of medicine. They're much more earthy than Chinese medicine, and the doses are significantly higher, and so I'm wondering, in terms of how do you administer herbs? Are you still having people make tongs and decoctions, or are you using granules or pills or whatever?
I use mostly granules because my practice is pretty much all online these days.
Yeah, me too.
So I trust quality herb. There's some companies that I trust out of Taiwan that I know that their quality control is very, very good, and I know, because I went there and saw what they were doing, with respect to spectral analysis and various phases of the production process.
So I also use granules, and I've been trying to lobby for Western herbs to appear in granules.
That would be fantastic.
Wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
It'd
I don't like alcohol as a medium for delivering herbs, and for many, many reasons. One, the least of which is expense. So I don't think it is an efficient delivery system. But we take a water extracted desiccation that leads to those powders, and they're all under super high, good quality practices. The GMP in Taiwan far predated any slightest consideration of GMP here in the West.
I visited the factories in mainland China, and they were TCM zone, and a lot of them all come from the same factory, by the way. And it's amazing the standards that they go through in those places.
So Taiwan, I went to Shenzhen facilities, where I saw Dr. Shu's library and his laboratory. That was awesome. And then I also went to Shengchang, and both. So Taiwan's got maybe 4 or 5 major manufacturers, and Shengchang was, at the time, had the lion's share of the hospital delivery system.
So what I find a lot is, when you look at the formulas that are being given in cases and for diseases, that's a hell of a lot of herbs. And even with granules, you cannot get that much granules to equal.
Oh, yeah. If you're looking at pharmacological dosing, I think that's a tough road to hoe. The places that do that successfully are in hospitals, where they've got their cooking vats in the hospital,
right,
and the nurses bringing it and they're feeding it to the patients, and they're but when people get home, you can't hit that kind of dosing. The best you're at physiological dosing, or even spirit dosing.
I mean, people in North America have no idea what it's like to be in a culture where herbal medicine is integral to that culture. Seeing how in hospital, when the doctors would write prescriptions, they would go down to the herbalist pharmacy, and they would put these herbs in individual bags, and they would give them a gun. And sometimes there was as much as a quarter to a half a pound of herbs in each bag.
Big doses. Yeah, they like big doses.
They put it in gunny sacks or big plastic, and people walk out of that pharmacy with this thing, with these herbs slung over their back. Of course, they didn't pay for it.
Right, exactly. Taiwan, very good insurance. Yeah.
So,
You know,
herbal medicine and Chinese medicine is evolving in the West, and a lot of people don't in the schools don't take that into account. They just think that they're practicing traditional Chinese medicine, and that they can't make any cross references with Western anatomy and physiology. They can't.
Oh, they can. Oh my God, they can. That's just not true. You know, I was in
I can't, but
93.
but
Yeah, exactly.
But you were in the schools. Were they teaching that in your schools that you were head of?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We learned Western disease patterns in conjunction with the TCM patterns, and it was all
Fantastic. Well, I don't know if all the schools did that, but
no, they don't.
When I was looking at schools, they didn't, and I think it's really important.
But that's how we did. I mean, we had naturopaths teaching our Western disease components, but even in the TCM disease patterns, there's the Western workup on it. Here's your TCM workup on it. But you know, in '93, I went to Italy. I went on a triptych through Italy, and I was checking out the herbal dispensaries in the basilicas, because you know the church had controlled medical services provision really throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance,
right,
in Italy. So I was just going down into the basements of these basilicas, and they have huge cave-like place with these walls of drawers, and all in Latin. Now I studied all my herbs in Latin when I went to school, so I could see there was not a single agent in that dispensary that wasn't also in the Chinese Materia Medica. So I think that
right.
The thought that there's a difference between East and West is maybe not as great as we think, and the trade routes between China, Persia, India, Greece were, I think, extant even long before the Silk Road.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make, and I fully agree. The Arabs were responsible for carrying the ancient world, because they translated the writings of Hippocrates and all of the Greek writings of medicine into Arabic,
Right.
And they also were heir to Ayurvedic texts, and Li Shishen's book on pulse diagnosis. They translate that into Arabic, and so the reason being is that Christianity was anti-medicine. They basically didn't believe that if you had any problem, you were supposed to get any relief from it because of the second coming of Christ, which was imminent, and you were supposed to suffer. And women, being the daughters of Eve, shouldn't have any relief during childbirth because they're paying for their sins, the sins of Eve. That was the stupid beliefs of the early Christian church. Meantime, the monks and the priests became the keepers of that knowledge, so that when you went to them, they were the only ones entitled to actually practice herbal medicine, and so it had to be retranslated from the Greek and the Roman to Arabic, and then retranslated back into Latin or Greek in the West. And then Culpeper comes along and he says, okay, now we're going to put it in English. And everybody really got pissed off at him then.
Yeah. Culpeper's one of my heroes. I love that about him. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I understand his book has almost as many or more printings than the Bible.
It is. I think that's actually true. Yeah. And so that speaks to social systems. It speaks to the problem of what's called social closure, where you have one discipline able to get a monopoly on the medical workforce in this day and age is one that's monopolized. It's been monopolized since 1913 in the in the Flexner report when the AMA and the Rockefellers managed to close women, mixed races, and Jews out of the medical schools, and only have medical schools that had laboratories with a chemical basis in their philosophical predisposition. So if they had a herbal basis and were avoiding chemical forms, those schools got shut down. Graduates of those schools got prevented from obtaining licensure. And in only a few years, they managed to completely create a monopolization on the medical workforce. Now, there were some good things that came from that. We can see the advent of technological medicine has just been like striking, right?
Exactly.
But it has been at a price, and we don't even actually know what that price is.
Right. This is the kind of conversation that I really am doing because I enjoy talking to Will, and I enjoy talking to my colleagues and herbalists, and hopefully it affords an opportunity for the public to understand that there are herbalists who are serious thinkers, and they're not just out picking the posies in the garden and coming back in and saying how pretty this flower is and that flower is, and that's all good, but there's some serious thinking going in with some really great herbalists that we have in North America, and Will Morris is definitely one of them. And I'm so proud that you decided to have this conversation with me, Will.
It's a privilege to be with you in this.
And I also want to give you an opportunity to, if there's anything that you want to promote that you're doing, and people can find you for anything, if you want to, please avail yourself of this opportunity. Everybody knows I'm associated with the East-West course, but maybe you want to say a few things about yourself in that regard.
Sure. My teaching, I'm involved with a lot of sound healing at this moment. I'm looking for ways to reduce total cost of care. And so I'm involved with my wife in the Kootenai Sound Healing Center here. It's a KSHC, and we run events live here 3 days a week. And we also teach people in the use of those sound systems, which are essentially using sound as a physical agent in the systems and the network of the meridian systems, right?
Wow.
And
that's
so
a
kshc.ca is the website.
Say it again.
KSHC.
And that's
Kootenai Sound
radio or internet.
That's our website. Yeah, that's our website.
KSHC.ca,
which is Canada. We're here in Canada.
KSHC.ca.
Yeah.
And that's for sound healing.
That's correct.
Well, as a musician, I know you're a musician also.
That's right.
We're very interested in that sort of thing. I'm doing a lot of show path.
So for me, it's like, plants. I walk outside and I can't see any neighbors. I'm in pristine mountainous region here, so
right.
pretty special.
Anything else you want to say about your work and how people can get in touch with you?
They can reach me at my website. It's called medastro.com, medastro.com. Medastro, Medastro, medastro. Medastro.com.
Medastro.com, okay.
And then you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and all these things. My email address is wmorris@medastro.com.
Terrific.
WMORRIS.
Okay, so
I'm grateful that you have me here, Michael. I think it was a really great experience. I've followed your work since the late '80s, and had a regular open copy of your book on my desk all during the '90s.
Well, thank you so much.
No.
Well, you're one of my heroes because you consummate knowledge of Chinese medicine interacting with Western herbalists, showing your knowledge of Western herbal medicine and my thing, which is to bring the best of these things together, and not let them just sit there in their own little cubby holes, and so it's great to have a colleague who's working in that direction as I have been. And
Right. It's a metropolitan effort.
right. So thanks again, Will, and
Thanks, Mike.
have a good life. I love you, man.
Okay. All right. All right, buddy. Talk to you
Bye.
later.